Welcome to today's podcast. I'm excited to share Michael Barracato with you. Say hello, Michael.
Hello.
Michael's an outstanding bass player. He's been a student of mine for quite a while. And seeing how this is the new year, and I've made a sort of a resolution, not really a resolution, a game plan, attack, a new sort of, a new development of some of the things I want to do in my music business and teaching. I've asked Mikey here to be here to share some of his thoughts on those things because he's been around teaching. How long have you been studying with me, Mikey?
We started regular lessons in 2011 fall.
So what is it? 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
Wow, nice. So he's been around. He's seen a lot of my students who some have learned to play well, some haven't. But the point is he has experienced and seen a lot of the same struggles and challenges that we all have. Agreed? Yeah, believe it or not, folks, I have found in music, actually in life, we're a lot more alike than we are different. I know we like to think we're unique, and we are, but there's a lot of things are common. But my sort of, one of my programs, my desire this year in my music business in general, is I've got a little phrase, and that is I want to build pathways and have dialogues. I think that's going to allow me to reach more people, and not just more people in numbers, but to reach people in a sort of perhaps a more defined or maybe even a broader sense so that players and students and teachers and musicians alike, people who, want to explore and expand their creative art, their skills and their abilities, hopefully by me opening up and sharing more of me and my students like Mikey, they can learn from it and be inspired from it. So that's kind of where we're at today. Fair enough? Fair enough? Fair enough. Mikey, tell me a little bit about your background, your musical background, please.
Well, I started playing in classic rock bands with my brother.
How old were you?
I was 10 years old, actually. And I think, one of our first songs was probably Jailhouse Rock.
Nice. Were you on guitar or bass?
I was on the bass.
Bass.
And my brother and I grew up playing basically that genre, playing in bands, things like that. And eventually I decided that I wanted to make something of it. And it was actually an interesting decision. I came to, I was deciding whether I wanted to be a plumber or go to music school. I remember talking to one of my brothers about it, and I was like, hey, Corey, this music college kind of just seems like a huge $30,000 a year gamble in my life. Mm-hmm. And, it just seems more reliable to get a job as a plumber because I had gone to a trade school.
Oh, you had that experience.
And I ultimately just decided that I wanted to go to the school, so I ended up going to just a trade school to, afford my way to go to college. And so that's where I met Jim, was at Berkeley. And I really found the musical environment that I needed through Jim and his community.
Cool. Let me ask a couple specific questions about that background. You learned Jailhouse Rock, and you said you played in bands and stuff. Were you good enough that you actually played out in front of people? Gigs, so to speak?
Yeah, I think, actually by the time we played like talent shows,
sure,
Battle of the Bands, right. And by the time we were actually getting paid to play in like bars, it was nice. Probably when I was 15.
So you did that. You were able to play gigs, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I too started playing gigs real young, early with my dad. Cool. And those were typical bar band kind of things, yep. Right? Mustang Sally.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Proud Mary.
Mm-hmm.
What was some of your favorite music from that era, that day?
We played a lot of Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
Now, did Chris play guitar?
He did.
And did he have the Hendrix parts down?
Yeah.
He's talented. He can do anything, can't he?
Yeah.
Very cool. Did you sing or did Chris sing?
Chris sang.
You were never the singer?
No.
Of course, quiet bass player in the back laying the groove down. I know that story. Well, that's really cool. So let's start from there. When I met Mikey, I asked a question in class of people. I said, any questions? What are you interested in? And some guys said, how do you play, what do you play over G minor 7? Other guy said, man, how do you play over a jazz tune? I think it was a walking bass lines class. And other guys were going, how do I pass this class? And Mikey raised his hand and said, what do I need to do to get good enough to make money, to make a living? And I thought, oh my goodness, here's a serious thinking student. And I have always, as much as I like education and art for self-development and art's sake, I grew up that way, same way as Mikey talked about. I've always thought of playing music and it becoming my profession that I could make a living at. And fortunately, I was able to do that early on. But Mikey asking that question really triggered some thoughts in me. And I answered him at the moment, but I think I really said something like, why don't you see me afterwards? We'll talk more about it, right? Come to my office or something like that.
Yeah.
Was that how it worked?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what did I tell you roughly when you came there? Do you remember it all sort of briefly?
Well, I think you told me to just keep doing what I was doing and to just apply for private lessons with you the next semester.
Right. So at that point, I just kind of gave you a pointer. And then when we started taking lessons, that's when I really told you what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was common, because if I tried to teach or answer every kid's question in class thoroughly, we wouldn't have learned anything in class. I'd just been talking all the time. Okay, got it. Well, one of Mikey's strengths, he has a bunch of them. We all have, by the way, one more time, I found that we're all a lot more alike than different, which means we all have strengths and weaknesses. One of Mikey's strengths is his stick-to-itness. Perhaps it surprised some of you a while ago when I said, how long you been taking lessons? And Mikey said since 01, roughly.
2011.
I'm sorry, 2011. I was thinking 1 to 19 anyway. Yeah, exactly how far. And some of you might have thought, my God, that's a long time. Folks, I found that to get really good at stuff and to really get things down and to learn a lot, there's no end really into studying. I have had students who really just, taken the brick out of the oven way too soon. They took lessons for 6 months or a year or two and then went off to be rich and famous, and God bless them. Hopefully they did, but most of them kind of, I don't want to say weren't ready. They weren't ready. But the point just is there was a lot more to learn. And Mikey's stick-to-itness has allowed him to become an outstanding musician. What would you think of, Mikey? Am I sort of in line with your thing? What would you think would be a strength of yours?
Yeah, certainly stick to it.
Yeah. So I wasn't wrong. I thought so. Exactly.
I think so. That's the most successful thing I've done, I feel.
Just don't give up, right? Yeah. I've often joked, which isn't a joke, and I was just too dumb to stop, to give up and quit. I just kept going because I was never quick and sharp and talented when I was younger. But boy, oh God, I could practice and learn that stuff and work on it and pretend I was talented. And as I've grown older, I've recognized talent sort of runs out. The kind we typically talk about sort of runs out at about 16, 17, 18 years old. The little kid who's a phenom, that's great. But by the time you're 20 years old, it's like, oh my God, what do I do now to really become a professional? So yeah, that's talent in itself. And that Mikey has displayed that big time. Concerning, this idea of creating pathways, I'm going to, work on a project for the whole year where I'm annotating on paper, maybe on my website, maybe in a book and stuff, where I'm going to try to outline different pathways to take to achieve different things musically. Now, I don't want to open up to how to be successful in life. That's big, and I haven't figured that one out yet. But I do know how to get a lot of people from point A to B in a musical environment, education, studying-wise. So I'm going to do an awful lot of that. I mean, simply, I'm going to create an anthology type thing to where I'm going to outline all of my books and sort of the like a tree branches, kind of, if you want to do this, you go that direction, then you take here. Well, I wanted to ask Mikey about a few of those things. Michael, what was the most important thing, if you can remember this, out of the first year of study that you got from studying with me? What was the big takeaway?
Learning how to practice.
Good. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Elaborate?
Yeah. So what I was doing before, I can remember just turning on like a loop pedal, and I just jam with myself for like hours on end. And I considered that practice at the time. And when you taught me how to, you started me off with the cycle of fourths, doing scales. And that was my first experience in my life at age 18 that I learned how to practice properly. And it was phenomenal because I was isolating it. I was isolating to just focusing on technique, and exactly what you were having me do. It was just nothing I experienced before. So that was...
Oh, that is so cool.
That was big.
I have to tell you a little bitty story that I was just talking with my wife last night, and what you said just brought it to mind, and that was when I was 18 and went off to college, I could already play pretty decently. or I shouldn't say that. I thought I could play decently, and I really could, but in a very limited area. I played country western music with my father a lot professionally, and I played in some rock bands like you had talked about. But I went to my first audition at a little community college in Oregon, Lane Community College, and the guy said, play a G major scale. And I went, I kind of stumbled and got my G major scale. And he said, now play a 2-octave G major scale. And I looked at him in a long look, and he said, 2 octaves? Well, I played from G across the strings, and then I crabbed my way up with my little finger up the G string, trying to figure out how far 2 octaves was, and it was out of time and out of tune. And at that point, I had an epiphany. Maybe I really don't know my scales. So I can appreciate you saying it's the first time I actually focused on something. Yeah, I went away from that going, I think I better get some scales and arpeggios happening. And sure, that was, for me, that was beginning too. So Mikey, I didn't teach you anything new. I just taught you what I had learned a lot of years, 40, 50 years before, okay? That's really cool. So that in itself is a starting point. Technique. Would you talk a little bit about the importance and what it has meant to you, in your later years, not later years, but since then that you started working on and you gained technique control on the instrument?
Yeah, it's not only necessary, but it's enormously rewarding to be able to play music and not have to worry about your fingers.
Oh,
I mean, that's the way music's meant to be played. And the truth is I didn't even realize every single time I was playing with all the bands and stuff, even songs I played many times, I was still worrying about my fingers constantly. Yeah. And when you taught me how to practice properly and I started doing technique, I gained control of the instrument. And then the next time I ever went to jam with anyone, whether it's that band or not, I was just in such control, and everybody that was playing with me, everybody that was hearing it could feel the bass it was doing it right. It was playing the bass right. It felt great.
That makes me feel good to hear you say that, because that's the goal. Some people don't understand that when I talk to them about, or, people who ask me questions about, can I study with you, or what would you recommend? And I talk about technique and I show them the cycle and I give them things to do. They just miss the point. Guys go, well, yeah, but I just want to be a groove player. And other guys go, well, man, I just want to play in a blues band. And they don't understand that if you'll simply put more time into, or if you'll master the instrument some, all music becomes easier. It starts to sound good and solid and correct. So yeah, we're talking about building technique as a sort of ground zero, step one of learning to play music. So we could call it learning to play your instrument first. I mean, I don't know if you all know the famous quote of Charlie Parker. They says, Mr. Parker, what advice do you have for young aspiring jazz saxophone players? And he says, well, you master your instrument. Then you master the music. And then you throw that shit away and play. Well, folks, the mastering your instrument takes a long time. It can. And the mastering the music, that's going to take some time too. Maybe we're just a victim of today's instant society where it's like, okay, great, I practiced for 6 weeks, I mastered the thing. Yeah, well, it usually takes a little more than that. And also too, just because you put in time, I mean, I wanted to laugh all ago when you said, I put on my loop station and I just jammed with myself for 3 hours. It's like, that folks, that's not practicing. Let's identify that. I've said this a lot, but let's see if we can identify it again. Question, what is practice? Maybe we should call it, what is good practice? I mean, all practice should be good. Well, practice is the repetition of a predetermined physical activity. And jamming on your loop station is none of those. While it does have value and it's fun, most people don't know how to practice. I swear, today, the biggest practice that people do today, or they think they're doing, that is, they surf the internet. Guys spend hours on YouTube watching cool things and thinks they've practiced. Mm. And watching cool things is fine, but practice is a physical repetition of a predetermined physical activity. So yes, and I can say from knowing Mikey now, he's good at practicing, real good at practicing. Tell him about that one period you went through when you practiced, what'd you say, 16 hours a day. Just tell him a little bit about it. Why'd you do that?
The reason why I did it is because I had just gotten a tax return and I didn't know what they were at the time. I was kind of young. I was 20 or around there. And I had originally, before I got the tax return, I thought I was going to have to go back to work for 5 months like I would do every year. And, the fact that I could keep studying full time for another 10 weeks, I think I had, it was an enormous relief, and I just wanted to make the best of it. And I think I sort of realized it was possible when I had seen Chiago play at the Bass Fests the summer prior to that, and it was playing like I'd never seen in my life. And when you had him speak about his past, he talked about practicing so many hours every day, and I remember thinking, like, I guess you really could practice that many hours, couldn't you? And that inspired me to try it out. And my routine was waking up at 4:30 in the morning and then practicing until 8:30 at night. And I did a time-lapse video recording it, just because I'd catch myself if I was just going to take a nap in the middle of the day. It's pretty much the only reason why I did it.
It's like a monitor, right?
Yeah, it's just a way to keep myself disciplined, I suppose. And I set out to do it for 10 weeks, and I ended up doing it for about 2.5 weeks.
16 hours a day, agreed?
16 hours a day, 6 days a week, and then just 4 hours on the day of my lesson when I drive up to see you. Mm-hmm. And so it came out to 100 hours every week.
That was the goal, wasn't it? I want to practice 100 hours a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I think about that a lot, because I felt like I was tapping into something pretty incredible with that.
Betcha. I think we underestimate what can be done or what we can do. I've used endless, analogies or questions, to illustrate like that. When somebody says, "Well, Jim, I worked on it really hard, but I can't do it," and I say, "Did you probably spent 50 hours on it then?" And they go, "Well, no." And I said, "Well, did you spend 100 hours on it?" "Well, of course not." I said, "The 200 hours in." They're like, look at me like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, I'll say, "Well, Charlie, if you spent, let's say you spent 4 or 5 hours on it, and you can do it like you can now, which isn't good. But what if you did spend 50 hours on it?" And invariably people go, "Well, it'd probably be great." "Well, what if you did 100 hours on it?" "Oh my God, it'd be incredible." Well, that's possible. Did you know that? Well, Mikey proved it. And by the way, I don't know if those are still up online, but the time-lapse videos you posted online of you doing that are a riot, because there you are. By the way, how long was the time lapses? I forget.
100 hours would go by in a minute. So you see me playing the bass and the sun come up behind me, and then the sun go back down behind me. Then I put away the bass, and the next day starts.
Exactly. Every once in a while, they were at the speed where you'd be sitting there, and then all of a sudden, hey, there's an apple sitting beside you. And the time must have gone so fast we can't see it. But then a second later, it's like, "Whoop, the apple's gone. Guess Mikey must have eaten the apple." Yeah. It was really funny. But I say that, or I asked him to say that, because to tell you about that, because not only was that an incredible feat, but when it comes to practice, the repetition of predetermined physical activity, Mikey's improvement was just boggling during that time period. I watched him do things in a week, which would take, some people would do it in 6 months, or they would give up because it took too long. It's just simply, it's too hard to maintain that discipline for that long a time. And we were talking about that today. Mikey and I were just reading music earlier, that one of the biggest challenges with keeping pace with our goals, and I don't mean practicing, 10.5 hours a day. I just mean practicing and moving forward, is that it's just too big of a task sometimes. When you're a beginning type player and you're an elementary player, you can learn one little thing and it's like, "My God, that's incredible. I did so much. I love it." It took you 20 minutes to do it. Well, as you become a more and more advanced player, those things we want to learn are harder. They take longer. And sometimes you have to have a 6-week goal, and you have to be willing to deal with only maybe 2 or 3 hours a week that you have time to practice. Now, yes, you might be able to find more time. And I've got another student right now who is having a hard time finding 20 minutes a day to practice. Well, I can give you my opinion on that, but his reality is that's all he thinks he has to practice. That's fine. But the trick is can you believe and can you keep doing that 20 minutes every day, staying focused on what you want to learn to play? Now, I've also found that if you don't do enough, if you take too long, and maybe 20 minutes is not enough time practicing, you just lose interest and get tired because you don't see enough progress. That was perhaps the coolest thing about your 16 hours a day the progress was just unbelievable. So now we've sort of gotten into a depth of in practicing, and that's fine. I mean, it was that Mikey's been good at that. But let's move on to a little bit of so. What can you say, Mikey, about some of the styles, some of the specific areas of study that we've done beyond technique now? Because part of my teaching is, yes, we learn to play the instrument, and really we never stop practicing technique. It's just that it usually takes a year or two for somebody to get real good control. So that's a given. Now, beyond that, we continue to practice technique. But usually during that time period, getting out of a year to two, I really start focusing on what do you want to learn to do stylistically. Do you remember one of the first things you really got into style-wise? I'm not sure that I do.
Well, it was funk.
Funk.
And
slap
bass
Was
workout.
it slap? So it was a slap-based workout,
slap and funk, yeah.
Because that's what you did started on that on your 16-hour day ones, wasn't it?
Yeah, around that time.
Wow, that's cool. So your focus on funk and slap, what did that result in? How do you feel like it benefited you? Besides, I just sounded good. I mean, obviously you sounded better, but can you think of musical things that you learned that you got from practicing funk?
Yeah, it was just funny you mentioned earlier today. This is an example of it. When I was playing, I picked up a bass, and you said, "Try this bass," and I immediately played something that I knew how to play really well. And to relate that to what you're asking, the slap bass workout, working on that was the first time I learned pieces of music in any genre, just whatsoever, that I had down, that I learned really well. And again, this is like after having played the bass for so many years, and even, I mean, I had learned how to practice for at least a year at that time, but this was the first time that I learned material
songs
solidly.
You bet.
And it was in the slap bass workout in particular, some of the solos that I learned note for note. And what that did for me is I could just pick up a bass at any point and play something that just sound good right away to pretty much anybody. I mean,
that's cool.
That's to me that's still important to this day.
Oh,
I mean,
that's a major step of having that under your belt. Yeah, when you played that etude earlier, which wasn't slap, it was a classical etude, it just sounded good the second he played. And I brought something to my mind, too, when you said that about just a moment ago about having something good to play. I remember when I'm thinking it was that pink bass hanging on the wall. When I purchased that, you came in the room with a couple of guys. And I said, "Here, Mike, you try it. Because I've got a video of this." And you picked it up and you played some slap stuff. That sounded beautiful. And I recognized it immediately as the stuff you had worked on like 3 years before. But it was something you have forever. You now have things to play that sound good. You own them. Yeah, good. Mikey, that's that. Do you remember that by any chance when I first had to play that bass? I've never posted that video. It's just I took up my phone, took a video, and there you were like slapping like crazy. And I'm going, "What is that? Is that a Rob Gordon-Lake thing, or is that a Buddha thing?" And I realized, hey, that's something you got from the slap bass workout book. And you were just grooving out like, and there's 3 or 4 of us in there. Everybody's like, "Oh my God." Yeah, folks. Music is oral. We have to be able to hear it. So if you can't play something that sounds good, how do people know you're any good? So that's a cool answer, Mikey. By working on that specific language, that literature, that funk, that slap, you developed lines, licks, phrases that are still valuable to you today, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think another good example or demonstration of that is when I invited my brother and my dad to come up see me perform at one of the bass workout performances, and I played a solo from that slap bass workout, and they were just blown away by it.
The room I remember it.
And them in particular, because they had seen me play my whole life, and they just never saw me play like that. And I think that's a great illustration of how you just don't know what you're missing until you've actually worked something out note for note and have it down perfect.
Oh, that's great. Well, that leads us into not necessarily, I had a bunch of different things I was thinking of, but that leads us directly into transcription. Agreed?
Yeah.
What do you figure, just take a rough guess, how many songs, whether it be a solo or a bass line, have you transcribed? 10?
Um, 5 to 10, I think.
Oh, I think you've done more than that. 30?
No, I don't think so.
Jazz ones too? Funk ones? Classical etudes?
Maybe I'm just thinking of solos in my head.
Yeah. Bass lines?
Yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
jazz bass line? I mean, I was
Yeah,
going
if you
to...
add all that in, definitely 30.
Add all in, I'm thinking maybe 60.
Yeah, that's true.
Bass line, solo, jazz, funk, rock. Sure. Classical etudes even. You learned a bunch by ear. I teach classical etudes for a lot of reasons. But one of them is technique, of course. But when some people or some students develop plenty of technique, now we can use classical etudes for ear training as well. So here's a beautiful etude. It's 3.5 minutes long and it's really complicated. Learn it by ear. Memorize it. You betcha. So you've done a bunch of that. Yeah, you probably hadn't considered in that question that very song you played today. What is it, F minor number 3 or something?
Yeah.
But I think you learned that by ear, didn't you?
Yeah, actually. I for some reason I was only thinking of
I know.
like continuum.
Right, exactly.
The hardest transcriptions.
Chaco, of course, yeah. Cool. Let's name a few things that you have transcribed. You wouldn't know the stuff.
Spiffy Diffy.
Oh, Spiffy Diffy. That's
Grant
Green. That's sort of
Guitar
a
solo.
shuffle funky blues.
That was my first transcription.
Was it?
Actually, yeah.
How neat.
And then obviously the slap bass workout solos.
Yeah.
Example 24 and example 53.
What about Marcus?
Power. I've worked on Detroit.
Nikki's Groove, didn't you do that one?
No, I think it was just Power in Detroit.
You did one other one I'm thinking of though, or I can't.
Oh yeah.
What was it?
Lonnie's Lament.
Oh, that's the one. Oh
Yeah.
God, that's such a beautiful one, huh? Oh, you played the saxophone solo in it too.
Yeah.
Nice. How about jazz? PC?
Yes, You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To.
God, you played that entire thing. That's long. That's like about a 3.5 minute piece.
Yeah.
What else? PC.
Lionel Lukie, track 5 on.
Oh, I'd forgotten you did. That's
Reading Bass
one of the
Parts, volume.
Reading Bass Parts, volume 1, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm thinking so too. Track 5. It's a song that I wrote, and later on I put a melody to it. I forget. Oh, Pine. Later on, that song became Pine, which I recorded a lot. But that was before it had a melody, and Lionel played a solo on it. That is just a beauty, a gem. And you transcribed that and played it like crazy. I remember that. Woo, Mike had forgot that one. We better pull that one out again, hadn't we?
Yeah.
You learned a whole bunch out of those ones out of Canadian Jazz Bassline. 12-bar blues.
Yeah.
You learned about 5 or 6 of those.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you probably learned some of those minor ones out of the book Walking Over One Quarter, D minor.
I started those too.
I'm trying to think what else. I'm sure there's a ton of stuff. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to illustrate the point that you've done quite a bit of transcribing.
Yeah.
And of
certainly.
course, its benefit, I think everyone knows, is if you don't have enough chops, it helps you develop your technique, but Mikey's always had plenty, is the big benefit is your ears. It's just you start to be able to hear a sound, and afterwards you see it in your fingers and you get it there. You can always tell the value of transcription when someone performs a transcription, excuse me, along with the record. The people who are watching are just freaking glued to your hands because all of a sudden they can see a physical shape, a visual shape that represents this beautiful sound we're hearing. Yeah, real nice. Oh, Lady Bird.
Ooh, yeah,
that's
260 and up.
You
the
bet.
album.
Killer transcription you did from that.
Yeah,
Oh, you also did Fred's Blues.
I did.
My God. Mikey, you've got a lot of transcriptions that you've done. Chet Baker? I forget.
No,
You didn't do a Chet. I forget. I signed different ones to different
Yeah.
students. I forget. Good, cool. Okay, so we talked about technique and then learning a style, which we've led into transcriptions. What about reading music? How has that been a benefit to you, or would you recommend as a benefit to other people? The amount of study. Mikey studied reading a lot, and he's reading very well. How would that be beneficial? What's that done for your musicianship? Besides learning to read music better.
it's hard for me to imagine where I'd be without it, like musically, because so much of my progress has been from it. I mean, I can think of just specifics off the top of my head. Counting is something that I know so many musicians just go without it, and it really affects their playing. So when you start reading music and you have to count bars and just count the spaces and the rests, I mean that makes it made me get more conscious of when I was ending notes. And
Good, you bet.
I mean, it's those details that make the greatest players sound the way they do. And in reading music, this was the time that I learned how to do this really well, because when you put an example in front of yourself and it's very specific and it's written out, it gives you the opportunity to play it over and over and focus on details like where you cut off the notes, or even right now I'm working even more on shifting. Mm-hmm. That's I mean, there's a lot of skills that you can work on through reading music. Right now it's my priority in practice, I think.
Good. And I wanted to add or expand on what you just said here, and that is, through reading, practiced reading, and now that you've become a proficient reader and can practice even more advanced things, definitely it has improved your musicianship. Attacks of notes, length of notes, hearing the rests, enjoying the rests. Mm-hmm. As we've played lots and lots of duets, starting to hear the other parts against yours. You know how sometimes bass players just, play their part and they finish and they go, was it good? How'd I do? That's because they're so focused on their fingers and their hands, they can't hear the rest of the musicians around them. And yeah, that's your musicianship, your ears have expanded because of when you've been reading, you've not had to think about what do I improvise, what notes do I play. You've had to think about, as I'm doing this, how does it sound?
Yeah. Now that you say all that, it also makes me realize that some of my most, I guess, educational moments or the moments I've learned the most through performing has been in reading situations, especially at reading days with you or at bass workouts. And it's because of everything that you're saying is getting to the point where I'm reading music and I'm paying attention to everyone around me,
right,
and trying to synergize with the person that I'm playing with. And I think that's probably the best opportunity I personally ever have to perform and apply all those things in a performance. Like right now is when I'm reading with others.
You bet. Didn't you play in the Shane Alessio bass band at one of the New Hampshire bass fests?
Yeah.
And you didn't play the bass parts, did you?
No.
What were you? You one of the horn parts?
One of the horn parts, yeah.
I bet that was challenging, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To be playing in a situation. Shane's band had, I believe, 3, 4, 5 bass players, was it? I believe there were 3 of you guys on horn.
Yeah.
Jim Lambie playing 5. The double bass, Shane playing the double bass, and then drums, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you were one of the 3-part horn section, which was bass players.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very challenging lines and a whole different process of you're not sitting there laying down the groove. You're listening and counting rests and waiting, when do I come and when do I go out? And yeah, I just remember that. What a great experience, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Okay, now we mentioned reading. Mikey, let's talk about setting goals and staying on track, or maybe even better, getting back on track. Because just like New Year's resolutions, we all set musical goals and at times we fall off the wagon. And I know for me personally, the hardest part has been to accept the fact that, I failed, let's start again. And I don't mean over 10 years or a year. I meant like over 2 days or 1 day or a week. Talk a little bit about how you're feeling and how you deal with, setting goals and trying to stay on track. Would you please? I know it's a struggle for you. It is for most people.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly struggled a lot. One thing in particular, a good rule of thumb, is that I always show up to any event that Jim ever has for like the last decade.
I
think I might have missed,
You did? No.
Like 1 day or 2 days out of I don't know how many events, like dozens and dozens of events over the last however many years. I just prioritize it because, there's been so many times where I was unprepared And early on, I was definitely, like many others, feeling like, oh, I'm unprepared, so I shouldn't show up because I'm just going to waste everybody's time and it's going to be really painful and all that. But I learned that that's the time you need to show up the most. That's when you need it the most, is when you feel like you don't, when you feel like you're unprepared. And that was proven right every single time that I felt that way. Right when I show up, within minutes, I realized, what was I thinking? I can't believe I was this close to not showing up. This is incredible to be here. And I felt like I was closest to what I really wanted to be doing when I was at these events, even if I, was feeling bad before it. And yeah, that's been significant for me.
It's just, so sort of touching and yet, sort of educational at the same time to hear you say this, because Mikey, I've experienced, I've observed that is the number one challenge for most people, showing up. I forget who was it that said, 90% of life is just showing up. Well, that's a fact. Most of us, if we, get off the couch and take one step forward, we complete and finish and do the task. We do stuff. And most people also have enough self-image and pride that if they do the task, they work as hard as they can and make it right. What happens is we have a hard time sometimes preparing, so we start to feel like, oh boy, I'm not ready. And then we start to be depressed, and that is, oh my God, I don't want other people to see I'm not ready. And then we do things like, well, I guess I'll never make it. And it's just a negative downward spiral. And the trick is just moving forward and gaining a little bitty momentum. Don't you? You've heard that story about back in the 1800s, Ma and Pa? They go into town to see the big steam locomotion engine coming to town. Well, they're standing on the platform, and here it comes around the corner. And Ma says to Paul, what do you think? And he says, they'll never get her stopped. Well, another minute later, it just slows down, chuck, right in front of them. People get on and off, and they're looking at it, and it's like, whoa. And Ma says, what do you think now, Paul? And he said, I don't think they'll ever get it started. What we're talking about is momentum here. A body at rest tends to stay at rest, and emotion. So, Mikey, I applaud you. That I don't know that I ever thought it exactly the way until you just said it, but definitely that's your strength, Mikey. You just move forward. You just show up. And guess what? That's called winning. We succeed one day at a time in our lives. The sad part is we also fail one day at a time. So good on you. I too do that, and I didn't know it for a lot of years. I was just sort of, like bullheaded or stubborn or too stupid to quit. But I must say I've never had a problem. I've always had to make myself, but I've always thrived on that challenge of, damn it, I'm going to get out there and do it. Even when I made a fool of myself and didn't know what I was doing or wasn't prepared. I discovered when I was 28 years old, and studying with Ed Barker, principal bassist of the Boston Symphony. I mean, by the way, I knew it long before, but I proved it then, and I would talk to some other students about it who would ask me questions. That, I was a full-time gigging musician with a wife and a mortgage and all that kind of stuff. Rent, and I would go to my lessons with Ed Barker, even if I was embarrassed to show up because I couldn't play this stuff well. I realized the value of moving forward, obviously of being around Ed, but of just continuing my steps, whether they were solid steps or not. At least they were stumbling steps in the right direction. I realized and proved to myself that that's what matters. When you're younger and a kid, you kind of, run off emotion. I like it or I don't like it, or it's hot or it's too cold, or But as you get to be an adult, it's real easy to make excuses for yourself. I've told a story which you've probably heard, and I think I'll tell it here now. In life, in general, but now we're going to talk about music, your education, your pursuit of art, you will always have choices, presented constantly with choices. And the answer to those choices comes down to two basic things. I can or I can't. I will or I won't. Well, the problem is on this I can't and won't side, there are 1,000,001 excuses. I can't afford it. It's too hard. It's too far. I don't have the time. I can't take the time off of work. My wife won't let me. My kids won't let me. My boss won't let me. It's too cold. It's too far. Here's one. Well, what I heard was, to just endless. I've got bowling. I've got, my dog, has diarrhea. On and on and on and on and on and on and on. And the challenge, the problem with all of that is, or the mistake with all of it is, anytime you use one of those excuses or reason, whatever you want to call it, now you can breathe easy because you actually don't have to do that work or that thing you said you had to do. So, yeah, just making that decision to go, I'm going to do it. Put one foot in front of the other and make a commitment. That's been a big one for me, and interesting to hear you say that. I sort of knew that was for you, but yeah, the same thing, of course. Whew, kind of got heavy there, didn't we? Well, it's the real thing. Anything else you want to add on that before we move on?
No, I don't think so. I think
Okay,
you asked me about maintaining consistency and practice. I think that's what you were asking.
Yes, and you started it. And by the way, that breaks down to same with practicing. I know guys, by the way, didn't I already mention I have a student who can't, who's trying to find 20 minutes a day? Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? If you'll find 5 minutes, 20 minutes is a lot easier to get. The point is get the bass out and play. Practice. Don't, have all these ritual things you have to do before you practice and all these warm-up things. No. Pick up the bass. I call it pick up the bass and push play. What do I mean by play? The play longs, the cycle of force.
It's funny you're saying that because it was yesterday that I had practiced pretty much the first time in a long time because I was in a rut or whatever you want to say, and the reason why is because I was reading your book Laser Practicing and I read that line in the practicing habits, and it was one of the numbers. It just said tomorrow just wake up a half hour earlier than you normally do.
You betcha.
And get out of bed and don't do anything else but pick up your instrument. And, I didn't get hung up on, like you were saying, some ritual thing.
Of course.
I just picked, and it worked.
I gave that advice to the same new student of mine who said he couldn't, 20 minutes was hard. I said, well, whatever time you get up, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, set your alarm for 15 minutes early. And the second it goes off, don't do anything but grab the bass and start playing that cycle of force. Grab the bass and push play. And guess what? Those tracks are 5 minutes long. And most of the time when you push play, you won't stop. So I see that as part of as the same thing as this bigger picture of just keep showing it, keep going. Well, I see the same thing. Just you practice by not going, oh my God, I've got to learn all this material and all this stuff and it's going to take 3 hours. Well, how about we just practice? Blink, push play, predetermined, and repetition. You bet. So that's what's got me by in all those times when I feel like, oh my God, I can't do something. Oh shoot, I'm tired and it hurts and I haven't done it for 2 weeks, so I'm embarrassed. And, well, so I just push play and do 5 minutes. Anybody can do that. It's just a choice. Woo! Let's go with one more topic, okay, Mikey? And that would be, what do you got in mind for the new year? What have you been planning on and thinking about?
Well, 2 books in particular, Jazz Architecture and Language, jazz bass, and your new Motown book, Motown Reading.
Nice. Going to work out of those, son?
Yeah. I want to work on those the same way that I worked out of slap bass workout.
I think I even said that, didn't I? I said, if you would own this sucker like you do slap bass workout. Did I say that a few weeks ago or something like that? Exactly. I mean, Mikey, you do that. And
everything's lined up to get that done the right way.
Good. You do that, and oh my God, it'll elevate you to an entire new level. Well, that's exciting to hear, man. I've already told you my plan. I'll just repeat it. Besides, I'm writing a bunch of new books. Is I want to create more pathways, dialogues like we're having right here, through the dialogues, through the conversations, and all different sorts of genres of dialogues. Open up some pathways where maybe you can go, I can follow that. I can do that. Yeah, I've been real concerned for many years of teaching people how to wiggle their fingers, and that's a good thing. But I think maybe, too, I need to get into a little more of this stuff. By the way, these are big influences for both of my daughters. They're into this stuff big time, and they're real good at it. Maybe it's a contemporary thing that I'm missing or have been, but whatever. But yeah, I'm excited to share people with you like Mikey, who's obviously, he's just, you've persevered and you've proven it. I mean, every time people hear you play, they're impressed. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And I'm excited to do some more dialogues. Part of my podcast or an extension, a start of doing that too. So fired up. Have a good time.